Show me one piece of evidence that you invented anything. The corporate lawyer's voice rang sharply through the sterile conference room. His expensive suit and cocky smile spoke of years spent crushing the little guy beneath towering corporations. He leaned back confidently in his leather chair, arms crossed, fully expecting the old man sitting across the table to cave under the pressure. But the veteran said nothing. Weathered hands rested calmly on a worn leather wallet, his eyes steady and unshaken. The silence stretched uncomfortably, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Cameras rolled, depositions were recorded, but the veteran's quiet defiance spoke louder than any argument or accusation thrown his way. Then, without a single word, the old man slowly opened his wallet and pulled out a single, faded photograph. It was small, almost unremarkable at first glance, but it carried the weight of truth and decades of untold stories. In that moment, everything shifted. The photo exposed cracks in the corporate facade and hinted at a betrayal far greater than anyone had anticipated. What followed would uncover the biggest corporate theft in military history, proving that sometimes the smallest pieces of evidence hold the most devastating power. And as the room fell silent, everyone realized this battle was far from over. It had only just begun. Welcome to the Veteran Voices. Before we dive into this incredible story of theft, deception, and ultimate justice, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being part of this journey. The gleaming headquarters of Titan Defense Systems rose 43 stories above downtown Dallas, its glass facade reflecting the Texas sun like a monument to corporate power. Inside the building's executive conference room on the 38th floor, a David and Goliath battle was about to unfold that would shake the defense contracting industry to its core. The room itself spoke of intimidation by design. Mahogany table that could seat 20, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and walls lined with awards celebrating Titan's innovations in military technology. At one end of the table sat the company's legal team, 5 lawyers in suits that cost more than most people made in a month. At the other end sat a single man in his 70s, wearing a simple button-down shirt and carrying a wallet that looked older than some of the lawyers across from him. Harold Happ Morrison had been fighting this battle for 3 years, ever since he'd seen a news report about Titan's revolutionary new battlefield communication device, a piece of technology that looked exactly like something he'd built with his own hands in a bunker in Afghanistan 25 years earlier. The device, which Titan called the TACnet Relay, was being hailed as a breakthrough in military communications, allowing isolated units to maintain contact with command even in the most challenging terrain. The Pentagon had awarded Titan a $2 billion contract to manufacture the devices, making it one of the largest military technology deals in recent history. But Hap Morrison knew something that Titan's board of directors, their patent lawyers, and their government contracts team didn't know. He had invented the core technology behind the TACnet Relay in 1998 while serving as a communications specialist with the 10th Mountain Division. He had designed it out of necessity, cobbling together salvaged radio components and improvised circuitry to solve a problem that was getting soldiers killed: the inability to communicate across the mountainous terrain of eastern Afghanistan. His improvised solution had worked so well that his commanding officer had recommended him for a commendation, though the chaos of wartime had meant the paperwork never went through. What Hap did have was something more valuable than official recognition: documentation. A lifetime habit of taking photographs had led him to document his work, his innovations, and his solutions to problems that the Army's standard equipment couldn't handle. He had photos of prototypes, pictures of field tests, and images of the final working device that had kept his unit alive during some of the most dangerous missions of the war. Those photographs, carefully preserved in photo albums and stored in his garage for decades, were about to become the most expensive evidence in corporate legal history. The deposition had been scheduled for 3 hours, but Titan's legal team expected it to last about 30 minutes. Their strategy was simple: overwhelm the old veteran with legal jargon, demand documentation they knew he couldn't provide, and force him to withdraw his patent infringement claim. The lead attorney, Marcus Blackwood, had built his career on crushing individual inventors who tried to challenge major corporations. His track record was impeccable. In 15 years of practice, he had never lost a case to a solo plaintiff. He saw Hap Morrison as just another delusional old man trying to get rich by claiming he'd invented something that clearly required teams of engineers and millions of dollars in research funding. Blackwood had done his homework on Morrison. Army veteran, served in Afghanistan, worked various jobs after discharge, never held a position that would have given him access to the kind of advanced technology that Titan had developed. No engineering degree, no patents on file, no corporate research experience. On paper, Morrison looked like exactly the kind of person who would fabricate a story about inventing military technology, hoping to cash in on a resemblance between his wartime jury-rigging and actual innovation. The room filled slowly as the deposition began. Morrison's attorney, Sarah Chun, was a solo practitioner who specialized in patent law and had taken the case on contingency. She believed in her client, but she also understood the mountain they were trying to climb. Titan had unlimited resources, teams of expert witnesses, and a legal department that could drag out proceedings for years. Morrison had his story, his conviction, and a cardboard box full of old photographs that Chin hoped would be enough to at least establish that her client had worked on similar technology during his military service. Blackwood began the questioning with the casual confidence of a predator toying with wounded prey. He established Morrison's background, his lack of formal engineering training, and his complete absence from the patent databases. He walked through Titan's development timeline, showing how their research team had spent 5 years and $23 million developing the TACnet relay from the ground up. He presented testimony from Titan's engineers, all of whom swore that they had developed the technology independently, without any outside influence or prior art. "Mr. Morrison," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the kind of condescension that suggested he was already bored with the proceedings, "you claim that you invented the core technology behind Titan's TACnet relay while serving in Afghanistan. Is that correct?" Morrison nodded slowly. "That's correct. And when exactly did you file your patent application for this alleged invention?" "I didn't file a patent application." Blackwood's smile widened. "I see. And when did you approach the Army about commercializing your invention?" "I didn't." "Did you contact any technology companies about licensing your invention?" "No, sir." "Did you publish any papers about your work? Present at any conferences? Register any copyrights?" "No, sir." Blackwood leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting that the deposition was already over. "Mr. Morrison, you're asking this court to believe that you independently invented a technology that Titan's team of PhD engineers spent 5 years and $23 million to develop, yet you have no documentation, no patents, no publications, and no witnesses to corroborate your claim. Is that accurate?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on something beyond the conference room windows. When he spoke, his voice was steady but tired. "Mr. Blackwood, I was a soldier. I saw a problem that was getting my friends killed, and I figured out how to fix it. I didn't think about patents or publications or conferences. I thought about keeping people alive. That's very touching, Mr. Morrison, but emotion doesn't constitute evidence. This is a court of law, not a therapy session." Blackwood's voice had taken on an edge of cruelty that made several people in the room shift uncomfortably. "You're claiming that one of the largest defense contractors in America built a $2 billion product line around technology that you invented in a cave with a box of scraps. Do you understand how ridiculous that sounds?" Chin objected to the characterization, but Blackwood was just getting started. He pulled out a thick folder of documents and began walking through Titan's research and development timeline, showing how their engineers had identified the need for improved battlefield communications, researched existing technologies, and developed entirely new approaches to solving the problem. He presented lab notes, engineering drawings, and prototype photographs that documented every stage of Titan's development process. "This is what real innovation looks like, Mr. Morrison," Blackwood said, spreading the documents across the conference table. "Systematic research, careful documentation, rigorous testing, and professional development. Not some fairy tale about a grunt with a soldering iron saving the day." The room was dead silent except for the software of recording equipment. Morrison sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table, his expression unchanged by the insults being hurled at him. Chin looked like she wanted to object again, but she knew that her client's credibility was being systematically destroyed and there wasn't much she could do to stop it. Blackwood sensed victory and decided to go for the kill. He stood up and walked around the table until he was standing directly behind Morrison, a power move designed to intimidate and humiliate. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Do you have even one piece of evidence, one single document, photograph, or witness statement that proves you invented anything resembling the technology that Titan developed?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison didn't turn around to face Blackwood. He didn't raise his voice or show any sign of anger. He simply reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out his wallet, a battered leather billfold that looked like it had been carried through multiple deployments. The wallet was worn smooth in places, held together with electrical tape, and stuffed with the accumulated detritus of a lifetime: business cards, receipts, and family photographs. Morrison opened the wallet carefully, as if he was handling something precious. His fingers moved through the various compartments until they found what they were looking for. He pulled out a single photograph, faded and creased from years of handling, and placed it gently on the conference room table. The photograph was small, maybe 3 inches by 5 inches, with the slightly yellow tint of film that had been developed in the 1990s. It showed a young soldier in desert camouflage, standing in what appeared to be a makeshift workshop carved out of rock and sandbags. The soldier was smiling, one hand resting on a device that looked exactly like Titan's TACnet relay, down to the antenna configuration and control interface. In the bottom right corner of the photograph, someone had written a date in blue ink: April 15, 1998. The silence in the room was absolute. Blackwood, who had been standing behind Morrison in a position of dominance, slowly walked around the table to look at the photograph. His face went pale as he realized what he was looking at. The device in the photograph was not similar to Titan's TACnet relay. It was identical in every significant detail. The young soldier in the picture was obviously Morrison, 25 years younger, but unmistakably the same person. But the most devastating detail was the date: April 15, 1998. Titan Defense Systems had been founded in 2003, 5 years after the photograph was taken. Their revolutionary technology had been invented by a soldier in an Afghan cave half a decade before the company had even existed. Chun, who had been preparing for the worst possible outcome, stared at the photograph with the expression of someone who had just witnessed a miracle. She had known that Morrison claimed to have documentation, but she had assumed it would be military paperwork or maintenance logs, dry, technical documents that might establish a timeline but wouldn't provide visual proof. She had never imagined that her client had been carrying a smoking gun in his wallet for 3 years. Blackwood picked up the photograph with trembling fingers, studying it as if he could somehow make it disappear through sheer force of will. The image was clear, undeniably authentic, and absolutely devastating to his client's case. The device in Morrison's hands was not a prototype or a rough approximation. It was a fully functional version of the technology that Titan claimed to have invented from scratch. This could be fabricated," Blackwood said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was grasping for any explanation that might salvage the situation. Digital manipulation, stage photography, any number of ways to fake something like this. Morrison spoke for the first time in several minutes, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Mr. Blackwood, that photograph was taken with a disposable camera and developed at a 1-hour photo shop in Kandahar. I've got the negatives at home if you'd like to have them analyzed." He paused, reaching back into his wallet. "I also have 47 more photographs documenting the development, testing, and field deployment of that device." What happened next would be replayed in law schools for decades as an example of how a single piece of evidence can completely reverse the dynamics of a legal proceeding. Morrison began pulling photographs from his wallet, one by one, each image telling part of the story of his invention. There were pictures of him sketching circuit diagrams on notebook paper, photos of him soldering components by flashlight, images of early prototypes that didn't work, middle prototypes that partially worked, and final versions that worked perfectly. The photographs told a complete story of innovation born from necessity. Morrison had started with standard military radio equipment that couldn't handle the mountainous terrain of eastern Afghanistan. He had identified the specific technical problems that were causing communication failures. He had researched solutions using whatever technical manuals and reference materials were available in his unit. He had experimented with different approaches, documented his failures, and gradually developed a working solution. One photograph showed Morrison's device successfully establishing communication between two units that had been unable to contact each other using standard equipment. Another showed him training other soldiers on how to operate the device. A third showed the device being used during an actual mission, with Morrison monitoring communications while his unit conducted a patrol in hostile territory. But perhaps the most damaging photograph showed Morrison standing next to a superior officer who was examining the device with obvious interest. On the back of this photograph, someone had written, "Lieutenant Colonel Peterson recommends device for wider deployment, April 1998. Morrison explained that Peterson had submitted a report recommending that the Army's Communications Division study Morrison's innovation for possible adoption, but the report had been lost in the bureaucratic shuffle of wartime operations. As Morrison continued to pull photographs from his wallet, Blackwood's confident demeanor crumbled completely. Each image was another nail in Titan's coffin, documenting not just that Morrison had invented the technology first, but that he had done so with thorough documentation that would be impossible to fake or fabricate. The photographs showed consistent lighting, backgrounds, and people that could be verified through military records. They told a coherent story that spanned several months and involved multiple witnesses who could potentially be located and interviewed. Chun, meanwhile, was frantically taking notes and trying to process the complete reversal of her case's prospects. She had prepared for a David versus Goliath battle where David would be lucky to walk away with his dignity intact. Instead, she was witnessing David pull out photographic evidence that would not only win the case, but potentially expose Titan to criminal charges for patent fraud and theft of intellectual property. The deposition continued for another 2 hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Morrison methodically explained each photograph, providing context and technical details that demonstrated his deep understanding of the technology he had developed. He answered every question with the calm precision of someone who had been waiting 25 years to tell his story to people who would finally listen. Blackwood, meanwhile, seemed to age years in the space of a single afternoon. His aggressive questioning style gave way to desperate attempts to find inconsistencies in Morrison's story. He challenged dates, questioned technical details, and suggested alternative explanations, but Morrison had an answer for everything. The photographs didn't just show that he had invented the technology, they showed that he had understood it deeply enough to modify, improve, and teach it to others. As the deposition wound down, Morrison made a statement that would haunt Titan's executives for years to come. "Mr. Blackwood, I want you to understand something. I didn't keep these photographs because I thought someday I'd need to prove I invented something. I kept them because I was proud of the work I did, and because that device saved lives. When I saw your company claiming credit for my work, I didn't get angry because you were going to make money from it. I got angry because you were dishonoring the memory of the soldiers who used that technology to stay alive." The deposition ended with Blackwood requesting an immediate recess to consult with his clients. Chen and Morrison left the Titan building knowing that they had just won one of the most decisive legal victories in recent patent law history. The photographs that Morrison had carried in his wallet for 25 years were about to become the foundation for a settlement that would fundamentally change how the defense industry approached intellectual property. Within 48 hours of the deposition, Titan's stock price had dropped by 30% as news of Morrison's evidence leaked to the financial press. The company's CEO was forced to hold an emergency press conference, during which he repeatedly refused to comment on ongoing litigation, while looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. The legal battle that followed was swift and decisive. Faced with photographic evidence that predated their company's existence, Titan had few options beyond negotiating the best possible settlement. Morrison's case attracted the attention of major patent law firms, who began representing him on a contingency basis and brought resources that matched Titan's legal army. The settlement, reached 6 months after the deposition, was reported to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, making it one of the largest individual patent settlements in history. But more importantly for Morrison, the settlement included a public acknowledgement from Titan that he was the original inventor of the technology they had commercialized. His name would appear on all future patents and technical documentation related to the TACnet relay system. Blackwood, The lawyer who had been so confident in his ability to crush Morrison was quietly asked to resign from his law firm. His aggressive questioning style and failure to properly investigate Morrison's claims had exposed his clients to massive legal liability. He would later tell colleagues that the Morrison case had taught him to never underestimate an opponent, especially one who had served in combat. Morrison used his settlement money to establish a foundation that provided legal assistance to veterans who believed their innovations had been stolen by corporations. He worked with patent attorneys to help other former service members document and protect their intellectual property, ensuring that his case would not be an isolated example of justice served. But perhaps most importantly, Morrison's victory sparked a broader conversation about how military innovations are developed, documented, and protected. The Pentagon established new protocols for cataloging and preserving innovations developed by service members in the field, ensuring that future inventors would have official documentation of their work. The photograph that Morrison pulled from his wallet that day became one of the most famous pieces of evidence in patent law history. Law schools used it to teach students about the importance of documentation and the power of visual evidence. Patent attorneys would show it to clients as an example of why thorough record-keeping is essential for protecting intellectual property. Years later, when asked about the moment he decided to pull out the photograph, Morrison would always give the same answer. "I didn't decide anything. I just got tired of being called a liar by someone who was stealing from me." It was a simple statement that captured something profound about dignity, truth, and the power of being prepared for the moment when you finally get to prove that you were right all along. The Morrison case became a reminder that innovation doesn't always happen in corporate boardrooms or university laboratories. Sometimes it happens in bunkers and caves, developed by people who are trying to solve immediate problems with whatever resources they have available. And sometimes the most sophisticated legal strategy can be defeated by an old soldier with a wallet full of photographs and the patience to wait 25 years for justice. But perhaps the most important lesson from Morrison's victory was about the value of documentation. In an age of digital photography and cloud storage, it's easy to forget that sometimes the most important evidence comes from the simple act of taking pictures and keeping them safe. Morrison's habit of photographing his work had seemed unremarkable at the time, but it became the foundation for one of the most decisive legal victories in patent law history. The corporate lawyer who had demanded proof got exactly what he asked for, though not in the way he expected. And the old soldier who had been dismissed as a dreamer proved that sometimes the most devastating evidence comes in the smallest packages. A faded photograph pulled from a worn leather wallet by someone who had been waiting decades for the chance to set the record straight. This story was brought to you by the Veteran Voices. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Someone who solved problems quietly, innovated without fanfare, and created value that others tried to claim? Tell us in the comments about the unsung innovators in your life and how their quiet brilliance made a difference. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.